Welcome everybody to Communication Styles. Here we'll be looking at Chapter 5. Our objectives will be, first is understanding how these styles can influence the relationship process in sales. Then we're going to identify two different dimensions. These dimensions are going to help us come up with 4 communication styles. We'll explain them briefly. And you're going to actually identify your preferred communication style. And finally, understand how it's important to be versatile as a salesperson so we can build strong selling relationships. Now, communication styles, we all have different ones. You can see here we have Bezos and Bill Gates, both very strong leaders, but both actually have very different communication styles. So if we look at Jeff Bezos, he's more extroverted, a little more outgoing, where Bill Gates is often described as quiet and reflective. So remember, communication style is a pattern of behavior that others observe. And when we talk about adaptive selling, it's defined as altering our own behaviors in order to improve communication with the customer. So how does this communication style influence the relationship process in sales? There's something called communication style bias. And this is what happens when we have a different communication style than our own. And this could be challenging when we're trying to build a rapport with somebody. And this is, again, because of the bias. This develops when we have contacted another person whose communication style is different from our own. This often causes that bias. And we really need to figure out how to minimize that bias in order to enhance the relationship with our buyers, and we can make sure that we have strong selling relationships. It's really important to understand one specific principle, is that this is a style. Because it's a style, we can change it, we can adapt it. So it's really a way of thinking and behaving. But because it's not ingrained, we can actually be adaptable. And that's what really our goal is, to really speak the other person's language. And that ability to do that is really, it's a very important management skill. And that's what we're trying to focus on doing. Now, let's actually take a look at the communication style model so we have a better understanding of what we mean by these styles. Now, the first continuum is the dominance continuum. So you can see it's going to be a range from low to high. So what do we mean by having a low dominance? Well, that means that people are typically more reserved. They're not as assertive. They're pretty easygoing. Whereas if we look at the high scale, that's where people are more decisive, more opinionative, typically more self-assertive, more vocal. So again, this is going to help us understand the different styles. But first, this is our dominance continuum. Now, speaking of understanding, it's important to understand yourself and where you perceive yourself. So what is your dominance indicator? Take a moment, pause the video, and fill this one out. This will help us understand your own communication style. All right, you've done that. Now let's take a look at the other continuum. So we had dominance. We also now have a sociability continuum. Okay, so this is the second step in determining the most preferred communication style. Continuum, we see again we have low to high. It's really an indication of a person's preference to interact with someone else. Okay, so they're usually more freely, they express themselves, their feelings more voluntary. Whereas if you're on the lower, is more of an indicator people desire to work in an environment where a person has more time alone. They also like to have more control of their feelings. Again, these two continuums are going to help us understand the 4 styles. And again, we want to understand ourselves. So take some time. Where do you perceive yourself on this indicator? Are you more social or less social? All right, you've done that. Now we can actually put these two continuums together and we can start looking at the 4 communication styles. First, let's look at the emotive style. So you can see emotive is high sociability and high dominance. These people are very social. They like to initiate the social activities. An example would be someone like Jimmy Fallon. He's a talk show host, so he likes to communicate with other people. He's very emotional, personable, spontaneous. These are the adjectives you would describe somebody and this type of style. So again, think about it in terms of, well, who you are, but also in terms of when you're selling to someone, if they're very emotive, how are we going to adapt to that type of communication style? Then we have the directive style. So this, again, they're still high dominance. They share that characteristic, but they're often more on the lower social ability. These people seem to be a little bit more busy. They maybe give the impression that they're not listening. They really like to maintain control. Example would be a governor, a senator here. We have Elizabeth Warren. If you haven't heard her speak or see her in action, she's very directive. She's very opinionative, very demanding and frank, a little intense. This is what we mean by that. And again, there's no right or wrong. This is just understanding someone's communication style. Very important. If we're going to try to get along with someone like this, we're going to try and sell to someone like this, we have to understand what their style is. Then we have the reflective style. So again, just like directive, they are low in sociability, but they're actually very low on the dominance level as well. So they don't really need to be in control. They are very precise. They spend a long time making decisions sometimes. They really want to understand all the facts. They're really interested in the details. Now, they might come across as someone who's difficult to get to know. They might seem to be maybe uninterested. An example, maybe Elon Musk might come to mind. So he's obviously very precise and scientific, but at the same time, he doesn't always come across as somebody that's very social. He does ask a lot of questions, but he's very disciplined, and it's probably one of the reasons why he's so successful. This is a reflective style, maybe asking a lot of questions, a little bit more internal compared to your social ability scale. And finally, we have the supportive style. You can see they're going to be high social ability, still have the low dominance. So they're really interested in other people. They like to listen. They're usually quite quiet, but they're still around people. They're still listening to other people. They usually try to avoid power. They use Lady Diana as an example. I know she's an old example, but just think of somebody that's very relaxed, patient, sensitive, warm, kind type of person. So again, if you're selling to someone like this, really important to understand that so that we can adapt to that style. Now, when we're reflecting on our own styles and we understand who we are, we can also recognize there's some strengths and weaknesses to all these styles. So, for instance, ideally you want to stay in that sort of green zone, but sometimes we get into that excessive zone. So sometimes some strengths can become weaknesses if they're a little too extreme. So for instance, if you're a very detailed-oriented person, that's great, but if you're too detail-oriented, you're too obsessed with all the details, you might lose out on the big picture. Just if you're a very directive person, you might be very serious, which is good, but if you're too extremely serious, that could be detrimental as well. So it's important to also understand the strengths and the weaknesses. How do we minimize that communication style bias? We talked about what it is to have that bias. Typically when we have two different communication styles interacting with each other. So we're circling back to our book. And really the important strategy is to be versatile. So we want to be able to adapt to the communication style of our buyer. And that way we're going to maintain that buyer comfort throughout the sales process. So it's about adaptability, and they call it style flexing. So if you're a directive person, you're very serious, you're very straightforward, but you're selling to somebody who is supportive, then you're going to want to be a little bit more personable, more warm, change your style, flex your style so that you are making your buyer more comfortable. So that's really important in order to have a stronger selling relationship. Style sensitivity and style flexing can really add value to the sales process. And to finish, really think about the platinum rule. Understand the golden rule, which is do unto others as we would want done to us. The platinum rule takes it a step further and really incorporates the idea of adaptability. So when we're talking about the platinum rule, we're not just doing unto others as they want done to yourself, but how they would want done to them. So we have to understand what they want, what the customer wants, and be able to adapt to their style. All right. So that's been our little lecture here on communication styles. Take a moment, read the chapter, look through, and you should be able to answer these questions. Thanks for watching.